Hey, everybody, welcome back. If you've been following the Starved Rock murders case with me, you know there's been so many twists and turns. It's so incredible. It's so outrageous. It's the most outrageous injustice I've ever seen. Today, I want to talk about a part of the case that I think gets overlooked, but it's the most important part of the case. It's so incredible and insane. I want to walk through this slowly and explain some of these points that I think a lot of people don't know. Okay, so fasten your seatbelt. Let's begin. Three women went down to Starved Rock State Park, Lillian Oding, Frances Murphy, Mildred Lindquist, in March for a hike, March of 1960. That's the background. Their bodies were found beaten to death in a shallow cave in Starved Rock State Park. They were murdered on March 14th, 1960. Their bodies were found on March 16th, 1960, 2 days later. Their faces had been beaten to a pulp. Their bodies had been displayed. Their clothing had been pulled down. It was the crime of the century. It was a national news story. Okay, there's a huge break in the case that people don't know about. Just 5 days later, after the bodies were found, March 21st, a telephone operator overhears two men talking on the phone. This woman is the real hero. Her name was Lois Zelensek. What happens is she winds up going to the police and reporting what she heard. We've got a memo. This is on my podcast website. This is a memo dated April 21st, 1960. The subject is Mrs. Lois Zelensek, interviewed by Trooper Murphy and Trooper Bales. And it's a 2-page summary of their interview with this telephone operator, okay? I'm going to read parts of it verbatim because it is so important. I want to explain as I go through it. Okay, here is the first paragraph of the memo. Somewhere between 6 and 8 p.m. on March 21st, 1960, when I opened my monitor key to notify the parties that their time was up, I heard the Aurora party say that they sure have a big write-up on the murder case in tonight's paper. You know, the kid has blood-stained overalls in the trunk of the car, and he's getting a little anxious to know what he's going to do with them. He's afraid he'll get caught. Well, the Sal party says, well, tell him to get rid of them, burn them. End of conversation relating to the murder. Okay, let's pause there after that first paragraph. This is days after the bodies are found, okay? And for old timers out there like me who remember when you use payphones, when you put coins in the payphone, when your time was up, the operator got on the line to tell you your time was up or you needed to put in more money. That is how she overheard these two men talking about this. And when the guy says there's a big write-up on the murder case in tonight's paper, clearly they're talking about the Starved Rock murders. This was, like I said, the crime of the century. It was a media sensation. It was a frenzy. That's clearly the context. There's no doubt. And there's a guy with blood-stained overalls in the trunk of a car who these two brothers know, okay? They know that there's a guy with blood-stained overalls in the trunk of a car. So right now we know at least 3 people know what happened. The guy with the bloody overalls in the car and the two brothers who are talking about it. And I believe there's more, for sure, because I believe it was a crime of premeditation committed by multiple offenders. But that's the context in the first paragraph, okay? Let's go to the next paragraph. I'm going to read paragraph 2 now. In further conversation, which I didn't listen very closely to, I gathered the impression that the LaSalle party was an auto dealer. They were talking about a business deal pertaining to cars, and the LaSalle party said he had the money to go ahead with the deal. It gave me the impression that it was a bigger deal than just the purchase of one car, more like the purchase of a business or business location pertaining to cars, okay? Now, this is the part, it's like she said, she didn't listen very closely to it, but you know what? She's spot on. Because I'm jumping ahead, but when this call gets traced, the brother who is receiving the call, the guy who's on that end, he owned car dealerships. His name was William Palmatier. He owned car dealerships. She was spot on in what she heard and what she thought. Let's go to the next paragraph, paragraph 3. I was so astonished that I really couldn't concentrate on listening to the rest of the conversation. So I heard no closing remarks or names mentioned. The Aurora voice I can't forget. It was a voice that gave the impression of an uneducated person, harsh, deep voice, no softness in it at all, limited vocabulary, no pronounced characteristics such as this, that, them, no foreign or nationality traits or hillbilly tones, gave impression that might be big, burly man. Talked like a man who wouldn't care much or think about anything too deeply, gave impression he was reporting to the boss, not nervous or worried. Okay. So some very particular things she notes about the way the Aurora party spoke. Next paragraph. The LaSalle voice is just a natural man's voice, low, soft, used to talking to people, a typical salesman's voice and manner of speech, no outstanding characteristics. He seemed to be the dominant one of the two. Okay. Now, this is an important paragraph. I'm going to skip to the bottom paragraph on the first page. I was uncertain what to do after hearing this conversation. The rules of communication prohibit revealing anything overheard, yet I felt strongly that I just overheard something extremely important. I thought about it over all this time and discussed it with my husband, Glenn. He said that I couldn't be sure and advised me to stay out of it. Last week, it really began bothering me. I even considered going to my priest for advice. Then finally, on Saturday, April 16th, I decided to tell my neighbor, Jim Brummel, who's an Aurora police officer. Jim told Lieutenant Vielman, and the lieutenant called me to the police station about 5 p.m. Saturday evening, where I told the lieutenant my story. The lieutenant requested that I attempt to find the phone numbers involved and that he would notify the investigating authorities. Okay. Now on page 2, on the very last sentence here that I've highlighted, it says, after taking this statement, we agree with the lieutenant's opinion that this subject is most sincere and quite relieved to finally tell her story and get it off her mind. Wow. Is that a bombshell? Is that like an incredible bombshell? What are the odds this telephone operator overhears these two men talking about the Starved Rock murders, a kid with bloody overalls in the trunk of a car, and the other guy, the guy who's on the receiving end of the call, saying, well, tell him to get rid of them, burn them. Unbelievable. That memo, like I said, is dated April 21st, 1960. Now, the record, because the case is so old, the record I have is incomplete. I only have bits and pieces. I definitely do not have the entire file in this case. But here are some things I do have. The call got traced. The call got traced that this woman overheard, the operator overheard. And the call was placed at a bar in Aurora, Illinois, owned by a guy named Glenn Palmatier. And the telephone call was placed to the house of his brother, William Palmatier, in Peru, Illinois. Peru, Illinois, as the downstate people know, is right next to Starved Rock State Park. Okay. That's what the police find out. So the next thing that happens is, fast forward, for some reason, it takes until the end of August. I don't know what's going on in May, June, and July and August. But on August 31st, the Illinois State Police interview, and there's a transcript of an interview with the bar owner, Glenn Palmatier. And they confront him with what the telephone operator reported to the Illinois State Police. And what does he do? He denies it. He said, it wasn't me. We got a payphone in my bar. Anybody could use the payphone. I don't know who made this call. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, bear in mind, the call was placed to his brother. He did admit that he frequently called his brother. Okay, well, here's what's interesting then. The Illinois State Police then say to him, well, we've been coming in here almost every day conducting surveillance, unbeknownst to Glenn Palmatier, and we've seen you talking to this guy named Lupe the Chief Cardenas, who's a known criminal and hoodlum. Okay. And Glenn Palmatier says, well, I don't know anything about that. Yeah, I know this guy, but I don't know anything about his background or criminal activity. Okay. Lupe the Chief Cardenas is a big, burly guy, like the telephone operator speculated. He does sound like a person that might have had limited vocabulary. He does sound like a person who might have been reporting to the boss. It sure sounds like the caller of that who placed the call was Lupe Cardenas. Okay. And I've since found out that this guy had ties back then to the Chicago Mafia. All right. So put a pin in that. So, wow, that's another huge development. We don't have the transcript of the Illinois State Police interview with William Palmatier. That's missing from the file for some reason. Okay. But newspaper articles report that the brothers deny saying these things. It's not like they had an explanation and said, oh, we were talking about bloody overalls relating to some other murder or some other case, or she took it out of context. No, 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 no. I mean, William Palmatier denies having any conversation like this, saying anything like this, denies the whole thing. Okay. They traced the call to his house. They traced the call to his house. I mean, it's him. It's him. So that's incredible. And that happens, that interview of Glenn Palmatier happens on August 31st. Here's a couple things even more stunning. The very next day, and I've got this newspaper article from August 31st from the South Bend Tribune paper. The next day, okay, all Glenn Palmatier has done is denied it. There's no reason to believe him. There's no reason to think he's telling the truth. And the Assistant State's Attorney Craig Armstrong says, quote, it's 1,000 to 1 shot he had anything to do with the crime. 1,000 to 1 shot? What are you talking about? This telephone operator was so credible. How about a 1 to 1 shot? I mean, 1,000 to 1 shot. There's something going on here. Why would he say it's 1,000 to 1 shot? That's just nonsense. That is just crazy. This is you could not come up with a more credible witness than this telephone operator who was so meticulous in what she heard. She was president of the Telephone Operators Union. She was so conflicted about what she heard. She thought about going to her priest. What an honest, nice lady who was so precise in her recollection. Even picked up on the fact that one of the guys sounded like he was in the car business, which he was. And then get this. A couple days later, the state's attorney, Harlan Warren, writes a letter to William Palmatier, the guy in Peru, and he says, he starts out the letter, I'm going to read this. The publicity given your name in connection with the very nebulous and remote possibility that a telephone call was made to your home from the telephone located in your brother's tavern in Aurora, Illinois, and its possible connection with the Starved Rock murders case is very regrettable. How the hell can he say that when he doesn't even know anything about the case? It's unbelievable. The call was traced to William Palmatier's house. And you got the state's attorney saying, oh, I'm so sorry to have bothered you. I'm so sorry. It's so very regrettable. What is going on here? It sounds like these brothers who should be implicated in the Starved Rock murders, and there should be a full court press investigation. Something's going on here. What is going on and why? So what happens? Let's continue. Now let's get into September. So what the state's attorney's office decides to do is to give polygraph exams to the two brothers and the telephone operator. Okay, here's the thing. We all know polygraph exams are not admissible in court. They're just a tool to basically put pressure on people to try to, tell people, oh, you failed the exam, and, try to pressure them. They are no substitute. You never would exonerate somebody for a crime just because they passed a polygraph. You got to investigate. So these brothers, find out who they know, find out their connections, find out who they were talking to, find out, everything you can about these guys. I mean, do a thorough full court investigation. So what happens? They give these polygraph exams to these brothers, and they give one to, just the brothers in September. And guess what? John Reed and Associate and Stephen Kindig, the polygraph examiners, handpicked by State's Attorney Harlan Warren, by the way, claimed the brothers passed. They passed their polygraph exams. They were telling the truth when they denied having anything to do with this call or these murders or anything like that. Okay. Stephen Kindig, by the way, if you listen to my podcast, was friends with Robert Murphy, one of the husbands of the victims. There's a lot more to that story. That's a whole nother video. Okay. So in September now, Harlan Warren gives some additional Starved Rock Lodge people polygraphs, one of which was Chester Weger, the 21-year-old dishwasher at the lodge, who, by the way, had already passed 6 polygraph exams. Yeah, he'd already passed 6 polygraph exams. Why are they giving him a 7th? Oh, and guess what? On the 7th one, they claim, oh, we think he failed. We think he failed in September. And what do? They take him to John Reed's office, the polygraph examiner, handpicked again by the state's attorney's office in Chicago. And they're there with him all day. And they continue to give him polygraph exams. And guess what? They claim he failed again. And on the ride home, this is important, William Dummett, the sheriff's deputy, is threatening Chester Weger that if he doesn't confess, he's going to ride the thunderbolt. He's going to die. If he doesn't confess, he's going to get the death penalty, okay? Ultimately, when the case goes to trial, Dummett denied saying that, and a state's attorney in the car impeached him and said, no, Dummett said that. Dummett threatened Chester Weger. So that's what's going on in September. They're threatening Chester Weger. The brothers have now been cleared by these bogus polygraphs, and they've got their eyes set on the 21-year-old dishwasher, and there is nothing, zero, linking him to the crime. No physical evidence, no witnesses, nothing, zero. And they're now threatening him with the death penalty. Let's go into October. What are they doing? They now are doing surveillance on Chester Weger 24/7. What a pressure campaign. They are following this guy everywhere, continuing to threaten him, coerce him, and intimidate him. And now in October, what else happens? They decide to give a polygraph exam to the telephone operator, Stephen Kindig, the handpicked polygraph examiner. And guess what? They claim she failed. Are you kidding me? What nonsense. What BS. There's no way. This lady heard what she heard. That interview with the Illinois State Police is so meticulous and thorough. They're claiming she failed the polygraph exam. Really? This lady? She lied and doesn't remember what she heard. What a joke. In fact, the language from her polygraph exam is so ridiculous. We had a polygraph examiner look at this, and the way he said you would never describe it this way. The report, this is the report of the polygraph examiner's polygraph. I'm sorry, the telephone operator's polygraph exam. The polygraph charts of this subject indicate that she is not telling the whole truth in this case. There are general indications of deception throughout her charts. Really? Deception? However, they are not consistent enough for the examiner to be able to indicate specifically to which areas. Oh, that's interesting. It's his opinion she's being untruthful. Really? It would appear that these test results could be due either to the subject's fabrication of facts. Are you fucking kidding me? You're claiming she's fabricating facts? Or her not being sure what she actually overheard, and quite possibly a combination of both of these. What a joke. What an absolute joke. And I mean, what is going on here now? These brothers are getting swept under the rug. We're now building a case against Chester Weger. There's no evidence at all. Again, like I said, with Chester Weger. And now what happens? We get into November. Chester Weger gets arrested without probable cause. He gets arrested and charged with triple murders. For what? Based on what? You can't base it on a polygraph. There's no evidence. There's no forensics. There's no witnesses. There's nothing. He gets arrested in mid-November, and then once they arrest him and charge him with the triple murders and threaten him that he's going to die and be electrocuted, he winds up confessing to save himself. And that's how the case plays out. Is that the most unbelievable, outrageous thing you've ever heard? And so I think this part of the case that I really wanted to stress was the hero here is Lois Zelensek, the telephone operator. At the end of the day, Chester Weger then there's a trial. He recants his confession. He testifies in his own defense. He gets convicted. And guess what? The next year, there's a bunch of reward money passed out. And guess who gets it? Harlan Warren, the state's attorney, William Dummett, the deputy who threatened Chester Weger with the death penalty, Stephen Kindig, the polygraph examiner who claimed that Chester failed her polygraph exam and that Lois Zelensky failed her polygraph exam. Are you kidding me? They're collecting reward money. You know who the hero was? Lois Zelensky. She cracked the case. She gave the law enforcement in the state's attorney's office everything they needed to know. She cracked the case when she heard what she heard. She was a hero. She was so conflicted because she knew what she heard was supposed to be confidential, but she reported it and she had cracked the case. And it's amazing that if you actually would have had law enforcement and state's attorneys doing their job, this case, history would have been rewritten so differently. She'd have been the hero. The real people would have been brought to justice. Chester Weger would have lived his life and grown up like a regular person like you and I. And instead, Chester Weger got framed, intentionally got railroaded, charged with the murders, spent over 60 years in prison, and is now 85 years old. It is a stunning, outrageous case of injustice. Follow my podcast on the Starbuck murders. We go through a whole chronology of everything, but I think this telephone operator part of the case is so important and so overlooked, and most people don't know about it. And check it out. Take a deep dive, share it, talk about it. I got to tell the story. I got to share the story. We are trying to get justice for Chester. I hope we can get there because he deserves it. We got a big court hearing coming up September 11th. Stay tuned for more. Thank you for listening and watching. Chester and I and his family really appreciate it.